Hey class, it's Miss Adelson here with another Read Aloud. Today I'm going to read From Seed to Pine Tree, Following the Life Cycle. And this is an informational text, so we're going to learn all about how pine trees grow starting as a seed. And I know you guys have learned about plant life cycles already with Ms. Zhang in science, and I remember seeing some of your awesome projects illustrating the life cycle. So this should be just a little refresher for you all, and I hope you enjoy it. So let's get started. Here we go. So this section is titled Beautiful Pine. Pine trees are known for their long, thin leaves called needles. Pine trees are evergreens, so their needles stay green year-round. These beautiful trees are found in forests, parks, and maybe even your yard. More than 150 different kinds of trees belong to the pine family. They all have the same basic life cycle. Let's look at the life cycle of the short-leaf pine tree. So, based on just this first page, the author has told us about pine trees and why they're called evergreens, and laid out the foundation to let us know what this whole book is going to be all about. And then we have a little bit of some fun information right here to go along with it. It says, in the United States, the shortleaf pine tree is found in 22 states. It grows as far south and west as Texas, throughout the eastern part of the country, and as far north as New York. So here you can see all of this dark green area is where pine trees grow. Who knew that pine trees grew in Texas? I didn't know that pine trees were found in Texas. I mean, I've gone and gotten pine trees for Christmas with my family at pine tree farms, but I didn't realize that they're just found here naturally. I learned something new, and I hope you do too. Now we have another section. This section is titled A Small Seed. So I'm sure you guys can probably guess what this section is going to be all about. A towering pine tree begins life as a tiny brown seed. The winged seed is protected inside a closed pine cone. In fall, the pine cone opens. The wind carries the winged seed to the ground. This small seed starts to germinate, or sprout, when temperatures rise in spring. A seed also needs water and air to begin growing. So you can see some pictures of these seeds on the ground here, and then in the background you can see what they're all going to become. Then we have another little fun fact. A seed has nutrients or food inside itself to help it grow. It uses this food until the plant is big enough to make its own. So you guys know plants make their own food. But can they make their own food when they're just a little seed? No. Because what do they need to make their own food? They need leaves to absorb sunlight and water and oxygen. No, not oxygen, carbon dioxide. And they produce oxygen for us to breathe. But yeah, they can't get any of those things until they have roots and leaves, which they don't have as a seed. So they have their own food stored away already so they can start to grow until they have their own roots and leaves to make the food themselves. Alright, this next section is titled A Seedling Sprouts. This is so exciting. I love this book. The seedling sprouts. So when a seed begins to sprout, the tough outer coat of the seed opens. Soon, tiny roots grow downward into the ground. They take in water and hold the seed in place. Soon, a green shoot sprouts upward toward the bright sunlight. Next, green needles grow from the shoot. The seed has become a young tree called a seedling. And here you can see the pictures. So we start off with the seed, and it breaks open so that the roots can start growing down into the ground. And the roots serve two purposes. One is to help the plant get water, because just like you and me, plants need water. And two, the roots help hold the tree in place. I don't know about you guys, but when you go outside and you see trees, they're always in the same spot. They don't move around. And the reason they're able to do that is because they have roots that hold them in place. If they didn't have roots to hold them in place, they'd fall over and it would just be a giant mess. Absolute insanity. So after the roots, we get a shoot, which is just a little bitty beginning of the plant, and from there the needles start to grow. And it's called a seedling. So cute, little baby tree. Then we have another little fun fact. Most shortleaf pine seedlings die before they are a year old. Oh. Sometimes this happens because seedlings do not get enough water. Other seedlings are eaten by hungry insects. Often, too many seeds fall in a small area. There may not be enough nutrients for all of them to survive. So here we have a picture of a seedling, and look at all of these bugs eating him, and he's not going to get to grow up because they're going to eat him all. So sad. Alright, so this section is titled Growing Tall. What do you think? What do you think this section is going to be about? So we have our little baby seedling, and now it's going to do what? Grow tall. A seedling needs air, sunlight, and water to grow. It uses these things to make food in its needles. This process is called photosynthesis. A short-leaf pine seedling becomes a sapling when it is 3 years old. A sapling has a strong, woody trunk and looks like its parent tree. So, photosynthesis is one of my favorite words, and if you're ever not sure what it means, you can look at the two parts of the word. The first part is photo, and that means light, and then synthesis means to make. When you synthesize something, you're making something. So photosynthesis is how plants make or synthesize their own food using energy from the sun. Very cool. So they take in all of this air and water and some sunlight, and they do science things, and then they get food for themselves, but they also produce oxygen for us to breathe. And here we have another little fun fact. It says, during photosynthesis, pine trees make a gas called oxygen in their long needles. People and animals need oxygen to live. I just said that. What? So exciting. Ooh, this section is a mighty pine. While I'm reading this page to you, I want you to think about this question. Why are short-leaf pines also called evergreens? So I'm going to read this, and it's going to explain why they're called evergreens. I want you to remember that, so make sure you're ready to write it down so that you can share your answer with me through Class Dojo, okay? A sapling grows taller each year until it becomes a mighty pine tree. When a short-leaf pine tree is 20 years old, it will be about 60 feet tall. That's really tall. Most full-grown short-leaf pine trees reach a height of 100 feet. That's about as tall as a 10-story building. So if you're ever out and about in the city and you see a building and you count 10 floors up, that is about as tall as some short-leaf pine trees get. Wow. That's just so cool to me. And I have a little picture to help illustrate that fact. And we have another little fun fact. In fall, some of the short-leaf pine trees' needles turn brown and fall off. Other needles stay green all winter. That is why they're called an evergreen tree. In spring, a pine tree grows new needles on the tips of its branches. So I hope you guys caught that. They're called evergreens because their needles stay green all winter. So all year round, their leaves or their needles stay green. So that's why they're called evergreens, because they're forever green. Who knew? I knew. I don't know if you guys knew. I hope you learned something new. This section is called Flowers Called Pine Cones. So just based on that title already, I know this section is going to be about pine cones, and they are also flowers. I didn't know that pine cones were flowers. Did you know that pine cones were flowers? Because I didn't, and I think that's super cool. When a short-leaf pine tree is 20 years old, it grows special flowers in the spring. The flowers are called pine cones. Some pine cones are male and others are female. New male pine cones are smaller than female pine cones. The long, thin male pine cones are yellow or green. New female pine cones are green. The thick scales on the female pine cones later turn brown and hard. This is probably what you're most familiar with and what you probably think of when you hear the word pine cones. Definitely what I think of when I think of pine cones. But these are also pine cones. These male pine cones also turn brown as time goes on. And here's our little fun fact. Male shortleaf pine cones are about 1/2 to 2 inches long. Female shortleaf pine cones are about 1 to 3 8/10 inches long. That's a big difference. Female pine cones are so much bigger than male pine cones. That's so cool. So from this page, I'm going to ask you guys a question to answer on Class Dojo, explaining what the two types of flowers on a pine tree are and what the difference is, okay? And I'm going to assign this book to you guys in HMH so that you can access it and get a better look at these pictures and the information here so that you can answer that question more easily. So what are the two different types of pine cones? We've got male, we've got female, and what is their difference? What's different about them? I see lots of differences between them, and this book even described lots of differences between them too. So make sure you go back and check that out so that you can answer those questions in Class Dojo. Next section is titled Making New Seeds. Male pine cones make a yellow dust called pollen. The wind blows some of this pollen onto the open scales of the female pine cones. Soon, the female scales close, trapping the pollen inside. When the pollen fertilizes the eggs inside of a female pine cone, a new pine tree seed starts to form. That's so cool. I had no idea this is how pine cones work. This is blowing my mind. Is this blowing your mind? Our little fun fact says female pine cones can be fertilized by male pine cones on the same tree. So these two, the male and female pine cones, can be on the same tree, and the pollen transfers from the male on this tree to the female pine cone on the same tree, or they can be fertilized by the pollen from male pine cones on a separate tree. So one or the other. They both produce the same thing. The female pine cone will close up around the pollen and a new seed will start to form. Our next section is titled Flying Free. When the new seeds are fully grown, the scales on a female pine cone open. In late October, these winged seeds begin falling to the ground. The long wing helps the seed float away from the shade of its parent tree. The seed needs plenty of sunlight to grow. So you can see in this picture, they have this long wing, and that wing helps them to be carried by the wind far away from the parent tree so that when they start to grow, they get plenty of sunlight. Because what would they be in if they stayed really close to their parent tree? They'd be covered in its shadow, and they wouldn't get enough sunlight. So that wing helps prevent that from happening, to make sure they get carried to a place that's going to have more sunlight than directly below the parent tree. And here's our fun fact. Some female pine cones, such as those found on the jack pine and lodgepole pine trees, need heat to open. Forest fires create enough heat to open these pine cones and allow their seeds to fall out. So, I know forest fires, they're really scary and they do a lot of damage, but they also do a lot of good for nature, and they are a naturally occurring event. So sometimes good comes out of it. Without forest fires, these jack pine and lodgepole pine trees would never get to send out their seeds to germinate and grow new trees. So some of it's good, some of it's bad. But it's important to remember that forest fires, while they are scary and dangerous, are good for the environment sometimes. Our next section is titled The Cycle Begins Again. After a long winter, pine tree seeds sprout in the spring. In the meantime, they grow into tall adult trees. These mighty pines provide homes for animals. Their long green branches give shade to hikers and campers on sunny days. During its life cycle, the short-leaf pine tree makes our world a more beautiful place to live. And here we have our little fun fact. Most adult shortleaf pine trees are cut down for lumber when they are about 35 years old. It's hard to find a shortleaf pine tree that is more than 100 years old. However, a 314-year-old shortleaf pine tree was discovered in Arkansas not long ago. 314 years. That's a really old tree. That is a really, really old tree. That is so cool. I am sad to know, though, that it's hard to find any that are more than 100 years old because we cut them down to use for lumber and other products that are made out of trees. But we need those things too, and we always plant more. So for this page, I want you to think about what the author's opinion of shortleaf pine trees is. Based on this story, how do you think the author feels about these pine trees? Does she like them? Does she dislike them? Is she indifferent and she just doesn't care about them? What is she feeling? Why did she write this book? And how can you tell how she feels about these pine trees based on the text? Okay, so I'll post all of those questions in Class Dojo for you to answer. And again, I will be assigning this book in HMH just so that you can go back through and read it yourself to help you answer all of the questions that I'm going to ask. Thanks so much for watching. I miss you guys so much and all of our little discussions when we do our read aloud. So I hope I get to see you guys again soon. Bye.